Hello friends, it's Chari and I am back with some New Year's Build a Cake cards. I wasn't sure if I still had more cake cards in me, but obviously I do. So let's get started, and here is a look at the Build a Cake die set as well as the Build a Cake add-on. I've already cut my pieces out for this first cake here using some metallic gold cardstock and also some All the Sparkles paper. And I will be using Henry's 123s for my year at the top. First, I want to start on my background, and I have a piece of Bristol cardstock. I'm going to do my ink blending on this. This is a little bigger than I need it to be, but I am going to trim it down with a die once I get my background created. I'm using Distress ink today. I'm starting with Squeezed Lemonade at the bottom. Then right here in the center, I'm going to come back in with some scattered straw. I'm just pulling this lemonade color up just a little bit further than I had it. So scattered straw in the center. And then at the top, I will use fossilized amber. So those are the three yellows I'm using to create my yellow gold background. I am going to grab a little piece of paper here just to keep myself from creating any fingerprints while I hold my paper. So I've pulled that scattered straw almost to the top, and now it's time for that fossilized amber. This is a really rich, beautiful yellow color. And once I have this piece covered completely the way I want it, I am going to do some stenciling. So I'm pulling out my grip mat. This comes from the inside of my Altenew stamp wheel, and I am using the sunray background stencil. And I'm just lining this up towards the top. Like I said before, this is bigger than I need it to be, so we will trim it down. And then I am using the fossilized amber again to do another layer of this color all over through the stencil. And I am kind of going in the direction of the rays. You can see I'm going up and down, pulling on that diagonal versus going round and round with my brush so that I don't accidentally kind of pop up the stencil. I am coming in with a little bit of that scattered straw down here towards the bottom so that my stenciling also looks like it goes from lighter to darker on top of that background I created. And once I get this looking the way I want, I'll pull that away and we get this really cool sunray background. And I'm just kind of going across the top again with that fossilized amber to kind of smooth out that stenciling. And then I am using the largest of the lacy rectangle stackables to trim this out. I'm just making sure that that lacy detail at the bottom starts right where my stenciling starts. So now I have this lovely background that my cake is going to go on. Now this cake design, or kind of all my designs today, are all about some sparkle and shine. So I am using my metallic gold watercolors. I'm using that dark one. This is the red gold, and I'm just adding some metallic splatters to my background that I created. Then I will just set this aside to dry so that I don't mess up any of those beautiful gold splatters. I'm also going to add a little bit of black, but I'm going to flick this off of a block so that those little splatters of black are very, very small. I just think this adds a little more interest by having two different colors of splatters on the background. Now I have a piece of black cardstock. This is cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I am just adding this to a card base. This is going to be my border around my lacy rectangle, so it's going to peek through those little openings around the rectangle. My background is dry now, so I can go ahead and add this to that black cardstock, and we get that really nice black frame peeking out through those lacy details. Now for my cake, I cut the body of the cake from a piece of 12 by 12 All the Sparkles paper, so we have that white with the gold foiling. And then for the toppers here, I cut those from gold metallic cardstock to match the gold foiling. So I'm just adding those with a little bit of liquid glue to the small layer of cake and the large layer of cake. This one is going to be a double stacked cake. So now I can stack my two layers together. I am going to use a tape runner for this since I am sticking this to that kind of slick metallic cardstock there. Then for my little details of icing, I actually use gold sparkle cardstock. So I am mixing all the gold cardstocks on this cake today. Now for the little icing detail at the top, you just need to cut off two of those little bumps of icing. And then I can also add it to the bottom. But first, I always like to put it on the cake plate first. Just like you would decorate a regular cake, it needs to be on the cake plate before you can do this icing at the bottom. And that just helps you kind of use that icing to cover up that line at the bottom of the cake. And then I also cut out this cute little detail, and I'm just adding some dots of glue on the back of those little circles. And I'm just going to layer this on to that tall bottom layer of the cake. Now for my number at the top, I'm using the little banner die that comes in the add-on set. I cut the part that has the little posts coming out the bottom, the little sticks out the bottom from Storm Cloud cardstock, and then I'm layering the banner that goes on top that has the cute little stitching detail out of black licorice cardstock. And I think that black is really going to make these letters stand out. Now I did pull in some silver sparkle cardstock for this using those Henry's 123s. And I know that this is a New Year's card and it has the year 2026, but I think this would make kind of a great graduation card too, just by changing the date for whatever year you need it for. This would also be fun to change up the colors to match whatever school someone is graduating from. But I love that the whole year fits right on this banner. So let's take a look at how this cake fits onto this card. When you stack this cake, it does get really tall, and with that banner up there, I didn't want it too far up, so I'm actually going to trim off these little posts just a little bit. I also think you could cut them off completely and put that banner with the year down on the cake, and it would also look really cute. I'm going to use some foam to pop my cake up off that background so we have some really nice dimension. And you can see I'm not gluing my banner down just yet. I did not want it to only be holding on by those little posts. So I'm going to kind of fake it and stick this down with some foam squares as well. And then just add a little dot of glue to the bottom of those posts so that they are tacked down to my cake. So just a little dot here, and that is going to stick to that metallic topper. Now to finish off this card, I want some more sparkle and shine. So I have pulled out the stars from the Hearts and Stars skinny tag, and I'm also using a scrap of holographic metallic cardstock. And the reason why I'm using this is so these stand out a little bit more from all the gold. So I'm using that holographic because it has more of a silver tone. I think that pulls in the silver of the numbers at the top, but also makes these stars not get quite as lost within all that gold sparkle. So once I have them arranged, I'll just pick each one of them up with my pick up pokey tool and drop them back into place with a little dot of glue. And I'll keep those extras. You're actually going to see those on another card later. And here is my finished celebration New Year's cake card. Okay, for my next cake, I'm doing something a little different. I cut two of the small layer of the cake and two of the stripe that goes around that small layer. And I've also cut the cake plate that is from black sparkle cardstock. So I have two cakes from black sparkle. I'm going to end up stacking these to make a tall, small cake, but that sparkle really does hide the seam very nicely. I am going to use liquid glue to glue these together because I'm gluing to that kind of rough glitter, so we want to make sure that it holds together nicely. And you can see there that that seam kind of disappears when we use that glitter. I'm going to go ahead and glue this cake to the plate, and look at that, we have a top hat. And I just think that this turned out so cool. Now I just used regular black cardstock, black licorice cardstock for the stripes that go around, and I did two so that it was a little bit wider and you could see it a little bit more. But I thought the contrast between the sparkle and the matte cardstock made it look almost like it was a satin ribbon around my top hat. I'm just cleaning up a little bit of the glue that kind of squished out the sides, but it's going to dry clear, so it's not going to matter. Now for the background of my card, I've pulled out the yellow watercolor wishes paper and I've cut this to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I'm going to layer on top of it the backside of one of the Gleeful Gradients papers that has that kind of darker blue with those cute little stars. And I am cutting this to 3 1/2 inches wide by 5 1/2 inches tall so that I'm going to get that yellow stripe down both sides. To give this a little bit of texture, I'm going to line this up with the stitched ripple backdrop. This is one of my favorites to add some texture to some cardstock, and I'm going to run that through my die cut machine. So this is going to give me those little stitched, and in this case, I think it looks like streamers coming down behind the top hat. To add a little bit of darkness to this and to catch in those stitching lines, I'm using some Blueprint Sketch Distress ink and a blending brush, and I am just adding a little of darkness to each side. So this is going to be the vertical sides of this panel, and you can see how it catches in the stitching lines and kind of darkens them up a little bit. So once I get a little bit of ink on the edges, I'm actually just going to run my brush kind of all over the whole thing, hoping a little bit of ink catches in those stitching lines in the center as well. It just really makes them stand out a little bit to have that ink there. And of course, we need some metallic splatter on the background. This time I'm using the blue gold in my metallic watercolor palette. Spoiler alert, I do some metallic splatters on all of the cards. So once I have this looking the way I want, of course, I'll set that aside and let those splatters dry. And once they're dry, I can start to assemble my card. So I'm starting with that piece of Watercolor Wishes paper and adding that to a card base. Then I can take my starry panel that I've splattered and I've blended, and I'm just adding that right in the center so that I have two equal borders on the left and the right of that yellow. Now for the stars that I used on this card, I used the smallest of the Puffy Star Stackables, and I thought about using this star border, but I couldn't really figure out where I wanted it to go. But the little stars that fell out of those outlines were the perfect size. So you could also use sequin stars, you could use stars from the Stars in the Heart Skinny tag. There's lots of star options. So for mine, I'm using the smallest of the Puffy Star Stackables and the fallout pieces from the star border. Now for my sentiment, I've cut a sentiment banner from the Stitch Sentiment Banners with Peacock cardstock, and I am going to white emboss the sentiment that says, "Let's Celebrate." This is from the Henry's Jr.'s Build a Sentiment birthday stamp set. So I've just put some anti-static powder onto my little sentiment banner. I'm using my clear embossing ink to stamp "Let's Celebrate," and then I will cover this in white embossing powder. Then I can just heat this up with my heat tool, and I like to hold this with my tweezers so that I don't burn my fingers, and heat it up from the back side. Then I'll move it to the front and that powder will melt and we'll get that bright white sentiment. And I decided to add an exclamation point to the right of this. I did stamp it slightly to the left, but an exclamation point is going to be the perfect way to balance this out. So I'm just stamping that in the clear ink as well, adding my powder and heating that up just as I did before. And now I have this very bright white sentiment on that peacock cardstock. So for my stars, I cut these from sunflower cardstock for that lighter yellow and number 2 pencil for that darker yellow. And what I thought was fun is because I have all these different sizes, I can stack them and it gives you kind of a really cool look. But what I decided to do, instead of just gluing them right to each other, I'm going to use a little thin foam square so I get some dimension between the stars that I'm stacking. So this is a combination again of that small puffy star stackable, that's that big star there, the stars from the star border that fell out of the outline pieces, and then I also pulled in some of the stars from the Hearts and Stars skinny tag. And for this one, I just pulled it off because I had too big of a dot of glue and it kind of just squished out everywhere. So I'm just cleaning that up a little bit for that little star there. I have these other two big stars. You can see that those other stars stack on top nicely. I'm going to do the same little trick with a thin foam square that I've cut down so it hides behind that star. And these are going to pop out of the top of my top hat, but I just think that's fun to have that dimension there. So I've added foam tape all over the back of my top hat cake so that I can put it on my card and have some dimension off of the background. So I'm just going to center this up in the blue panel, use my sentiment at the bottom as a guide to make sure I have it high enough. Then for the sentiment, I'm just going to adhere this directly to the background so it is nice and flat. Then for these little stars up top, I want them to look like sparklers or picks on the cake. So I have some toothpicks and I'm just painting these with my metallic watercolors so that they match my card and they don't just look like raw wood. And of course, I will set these aside and let them dry before I glue them to the back of those stars. So once they're dry, I'm just going to use a little dot of liquid glue on the very tip up here and put my stars right in the center of these. And you can see how it looks kind of like a fun little decoration that you would have sticking out of the top of a cake. So I'll let those kind of sit there for a second and dry. And then I can look at adding them to my cake. Obviously, I need to trim them down a little bit. These are really easy to cut just with a pair of scissors. See, I didn't let that one quite dry enough, but that's okay. I'm just going to pop that right back on there and trim this toothpick down as well. So these are going to tuck behind my hat. I'm just going to pick these up with my tweezers, add some glue to the back of this toothpick. This toothpick is flat on both sides, so it's really easy to stick this down to my card. And then I'll do the same for my second star coming out the top. So now it's time for all the stars on this cake. I cut some more stars from the Hearts and Stars Skinny Tag Die set, so we have some little teeny tiny ones now. I cut them out of sunflower cardstock, and I'm also going to cut some more out of that #2 pencil because I like layering those two colors together and varying the colors that are sprinkled around my card. So you can see I'm layering those up as well. These turned out really fun because I actually added some stickles to just the center star, which was a really fun look for these stars that have 2 layers. And I'm getting close to where I think this is probably enough. I don't need too many more stars on this card. But I love sprinkling those little tiny ones around. So here are the stickles. I'm adding it to the stars that I've layered first. So those ones that I layered a center star. And then for all the other ones, I will completely cover those stars with some stickles because they're stars and they need to sparkle and shine just as much as this sparkly black hat. So I wanted to stick with die cuts on my card series, but it would be really cute if you took the cute little yay mouse from You Autumn No and the little top hat from Happy Couples to put on his head and let him sit on the brim of this hat. I think that would be adorable. It just depends on what kind of card you want to create. So here is a look at that finished top hat cake, which I just think turned out so fun. There is the seam that you can kind of see, but you could always cover that up with one of the stripes as well. So now on to my third card, which I am calling the champagne card, and you're going to see exactly why. I cut my cake from speckled eggshell cardstock, and I'm using the champagne gold watercolor, and I've turned my cake upside down, and I'm just going to pull that color up from the bottom. So I wanted this cake to look like we had decorated it, kind of glittering it from the bottom. Not so much like we dipped it, but obviously we've brushed some beautiful things up from the bottom. We're going to add glitter here in a minute too. But this was a beautiful little base to put before I added my glitter. I did try it without this first, but I really liked how this looked a lot better. So just some very light metallic added there. It's going to add some really fun shimmer to this cake. Now to add the glitter that the watercolor is dry, I'm using two shades of Stickles. I have Champagne and I have Platinum, and I've just squirted a little bit onto this scrap piece of paper. I'm picking it up with my paintbrush and just again pulling that from the bottom of the cake up towards the top. And I think having the two different colors is kind of nice too because you get some variation. And I don't want to completely cover this, but now it just looks like we've sprinkled this with glitter. So I will set that aside to dry. And I need some champagne for this card. So I have pulled out the Happy Wedding stamp set and stamped two little champagne glasses that I will color and cut out. I did originally want to put these on the top hat, but as I was working, I decided they worked much better on this cake. So I'm going to grab a couple shades of yellow. I'm just kind of testing them out to figure out which ones I want. And I will color my champagne in my champagne flutes. Just adding that darker color towards the bottom and then a lighter color on the top. And then finally, I will grab a very pale blue. So this is a B quadruple zero, and I'm just adding that blue all over to the glass and just a little bit right over the champagne so that it looks like it is inside the glass. Then of course I will line up the coordinating die and cut out these two little champagne flutes. Okay, now to work on some bubbles. I have some vellum and some glitter shimmer spray paint. This is in opalescent opal, and what I did was I took this out to the garage, I sprayed this whole piece of vellum with that shimmery spray paint and I let it dry. And this is going to give me some shimmery bubbles. I am using the bubble border and I'm going to cut bubbles from a bunch of different kind of papers. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do at first, but you're going to see how this comes together. I did also cut a second cake since this was wet from the stickles and the paint. I just wanted to layer that together so I had a nice sturdy flat cake to apply all of my bubbles to. So I have my vellum bubbles, and I'm also going to cut some bubbles out of this pearlescent cardstock. So it has that beautiful pearlescent sheen, but of course it's solid. This is going to allow me to kind of stack and layer my bubbles, hide the glue behind the vellum really well. And I'm just cutting them apart right where those little die cut lines are. So I'm going to get little clusters of bubbles that I can start to put around my cake. Before I get too far down the bubbles, I'm going to add my cake to the plate so I can see where things hit the plate. And now it's time to just figure out all of these bubbles. So right now I have the two kinds. I have the vellum bubbles. I also have the pearlescent bubbles, but you're going to see really quickly, I'm going to start to pull in some more specialty papers. So here I have the Kraft Sparkle cardstock. I cut some out of that as well. And I'm just continuing to kind of cut these apart right where the die lines are. So I have these little clusters of bubbles and I'm starting to layer them. And this looks really great with those kind of vellum bubbles layered behind the pearlescent bubbles. It's really starting to fill it in. Nothing is glued down yet. I'm just figuring out where I want everything to be. I decided I wanted my champagne flutes to be on the top, and I'm going back to that champagne metallic to cut out a few bubbles of that as well to add up here to the top. And the really nice thing is I'm using a die cut, so I can like put that sparkle bubble right on top of that metallic bubble if I want. Once I have my placement for all these bubbles, I'm going to take a picture with my phone because I haven't glued anything down yet and I want this as a reference. So we're taking a picture and I can use that to reference as I start to glue everything down because I need to move them off to glue them down. I'm starting with those pearlescent bubbles right there. Then I can hide the glue of my vellum by tucking it behind. And then I'm going to do the same over here on this side. And you can see that one bubble on the left there has that little cut out, but not to worry, I am going to cover that up with that sparkly one. I just really love how this all turned out with all these different kinds of specialty papers layered together. I knew what I wanted to do in my head, but I wasn't sure how to accomplish it, and I really love my end result. So I'm adding my bubbles to the top. I have the vellum, I'm doing the metallic, I'm layering this one sparkly one right on top of the metallic. Then I can add my champagne flutes in here. and I will add one more bubble behind them to give them a little more support. There is one bubble I had in my picture that I actually did not end up adding, and it went kind of right there at the top behind those vellum ones, but I decided it made my cake just a little bit too tall. I wanted those champagne glasses to be sort of the part that sticks out the top the most. So here is that final cake with all the bubbles after all that hard work. So now to move on to my sentiment, and of course the cheers sentiment, that Scripty cheers was perfect for this cake. I cut it from some black sparkle cardstock and that kraft sparkle cardstock, and I'm just layering them together with a little bit of an offset so we have that shadow behind. And now for my background. I thought this was cute because it looks like bubbles, but I have used this on another card and I wanted something very striking, and this is what I decided to go with. So these are the stripe side of the all the sparkles paper. This is the black paper. I'm going to cut this out with the largest of the outside in stitch rectangle. There's that foil side, which by the way, also looks really good with this cake. I did consider it after I did this, but I decided to stick with my stripes. So lots of options depending on what you wanted to see. I thought I'd show you all those options for backgrounds. I'm taking my black licorice ink and a blending brush, and I am blending the edges to just kind of darken them up a little bit. I think this always kind of frames up whatever you're putting on a card very nicely. And because this does have the foil embossed on the back side, it is kind of catching the ink, and you can kind of see just the little suggestion of stars, which I actually think is kind of cool. I love how that looks. It really makes the cake pop. And of course, we need some metallic splatters on this one too. Like I said before, I splattered all my cards this time. So I'm using, of course, the champagne gold for this one. And I also added some of the white. And this is just going to give me some nice subtle shimmer in the background. I'll set that aside, let that dry, and once it's dry, I can add all these pieces to my card base. I'm starting with a piece of just black licorice cardstock. And because I cut out my pattern paper with the largest of the outside in stitch rectangles, I'm going to get that little black border around all the edges. And that just frames this up really, really nicely. Now, be sure when you're putting the foam on the back of your cake, you don't put foam on the back of the vellum bubbles. We just want to avoid those. So use those solid pieces as your guide where to put that foam tape. And then I can just pop this on to the background. I just think this looks really cool on that black stripe background. Now to add my sentiment down here, it is going to overlap the cake stand. So what I'm going to do is use my little foam strips, just cut some pieces to support the word on the left and the right. So my little trick is to lay this on here so I see what letters touch the cake stand. It's basically the E's in the middle. And then I can also see where to put my foam, because obviously I don't want to put any foam at the top of the H either, because that is going to overlap onto my cake as well. But this just helps you kind of figure out where to put those little foam pieces when you're adding a sentiment like this where it overlaps some things that you've already popped up with foam. So I'm just pulling off the liner paper of those little strips that I cut. I am going to add some adhesive to the back of the E's so they will stick to the cake stand there. And then I will just pop this sentiment right at the bottom. Now here are those stars left over from the cake earlier. This is cut from the holographic cardstock, and I just thought a couple of these little stars sprinkled around were the perfect finishing touch. I think I only put 3 there. You can see I'm trying to figure out where to put more, and I'm really just trying to figure out what sizes I like best. But this cake is really the star of the show, so I just added 3 little stars just kind of sprinkled around, just a little extra shimmer in those corners. And then of course we need some sparkle on our champagne so that it matches all the shimmer on this cake. So I am adding my Stardust stickles to the champagne flutes, and I also added some little dots coming up from those champagne flutes like bubbles, and they just go up off the top of the card. And here is my finished champagne cake, and I love how it turned out. There's those little stickle bubbles. Hopefully you can see those, kind of like they're floating up. I love all the shimmer that I added. I love that shimmer on the cake. I think that's a really fun effect to do that painting technique on the cake. And let me pull in the other ones I created. So there is my celebration cake, and here is my top hat cake. So hopefully this has inspired you to pull out those Build-A-Cake dies for New Year's. I think that these cakes would also be great for any kind of celebration. Just change up the colors and the sentiments. But these are some really fun ideas. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.